office or the vice principal's office for a little disciplinary action. I'm talking about an arrest where the child is physically handcuffed or strapped by a police officer and then led off to some other place on the school campus or even taken away from the school. How do you feel about a 5-year-old, five, getting arrested? Then how would you feel if it was your child? Because what happens from that point could be life-changing. It probably is life-changing because any child at that age, just think about it, 5 years old, barely can say their alphabets, barely can, make good sentences, barely can make anything possible that adults could understand. A child, 5 years old, still learning, still growing, that brain is still forming. 5 years old, and your child gets arrested at school. Okay, we know that children are going to be disciplinary problems as they grow up. That is a fact of life, and it has been going on for a very, 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 very long time. Children are not mature enough to always deal with problems and issues as you would want them to. They're going to act out. However, in this day and time, we have now gone from corporal punishment, or when I was in school, you got spanked for doing something out of line, to having a police officer arrest a child for throwing a temper tantrum or doing something else that may bring about some harm or danger to some other student or a teacher or an administrator. You call in the police officer, the resource officer, for arresting this child, 5 years old. The handcuffs don't even fit. Are you kidding me? You have to get the plastic straps and tie that child's hands together. Why are these types of steps being taken? Why is it necessary to arrest? Just the word arrest is enough to make you gasp for you can't believe it. Arrested a child, 5 years old. That's like they haven't even gotten, for some places, they haven't even gotten to elementary school yet. They're still in daycare or pre-kindergarten. I mean, but still, 5 years old, an adult, an authoritative figure, a police officer is called in to arrest a child. Imagine what that would be like as a parent, as a grandparent, to get a call early in the school day. School starts at 8, it's 9:30, and you get a call saying you need to come to the school because your child has been arrested. For what? What could a child do that would require such a harsh treatment? Is it necessary? Again, how would you respond if it's your child? And even if it's not your child, how do you feel about a child being arrested? These are the days and times we live in. These are critical issues that we have to face as parents, as citizens, as adults, because as we go on into talking about this particular topic, it continues to have that divisive issue that continues to cause this country, the great experiment of the world, the greatest country on the planet, as most tend to call it. You arrest your children at 5 years old. You're a great country, but you arrest your children at 5 years old because they acted out, because they threw a temper tantrum, because they did something that was threatening. Is this the only way to resolve the issue? Is this the only manner by which we can deal with a child that's 5 years old? As a parent, what is your responsibility? What is your response? How do you deal with your child at home when your child acts out, throws tantrums, does those things that you don't like, causes problems, uses words that probably shouldn't be used by a child that young? Again, our children mimic who they see and who they hear. That's a fact. They will mimic who they see, who they hear, what they see, and what they hear. Those are facts of life. And if you don't get your children under control at a young age, then these are the consequences that will be coming for years to come. Because it seems as though it does not matter how old or how young a child is. If they get too far the line, they're going to have the authorities, the police, resource officers intercede and resolve the matter. And it can become a very costly legal battle, legal issue that you really may not be able to handle because your child did something. But irregardless of what the child did at 5 years old, there has to be a better way to discipline a child. And for the old school parents and grandparents out there who came up from the old school and from a spiritual standpoint, who talks about spare the rod and spoil the child, or tough love. And trust me, I am a proponent of tough love, not abuse. I would not abuse a child by doing something as traumatic as arresting them. But there has to be some other way to deal with the subject and the situation. Here's a story from Hawaii. And it's about a situation that happened there and the outcomes. So Senator Brian Schatz, a Democrat out of Hawaii, is urging the United States Department of Education to develop clear guidance on how arrest and other law enforcement actions should be handled on school grounds. In a statement released back in 2020, an incident in which a 10-year-old girl was arrested at an Hawaiian elementary school for allegedly drawing, along with other students, a picture depicting a violent scene involving another student whom the girl claimed had been bullying her. According to an attorney representing the girl's family, the school was already aware of the drawing, but called the Honolulu Police Department following a complaint from the other child's parent. So we're going to start right there. So before you go to the school and have a meeting to resolve, a conference to resolve the matter, you feel you need to call the police department. And the police department responds to such matters. Now, it's one thing to respond to a high school or a middle school. Elementary school at 5 years old, but this girl was 10. So I go on. Police handcuffed and arrested the girl, who, oh, by the way, is African American and has developmental disabilities, and did not allow her to see or speak to her mother, who arrived later. So her rights have been violated. The school should know that she has some disabilities, and that should be a reason why we need to bring the parents in. The girl remained in police custody for more than 4 hours. 4 hours. The trauma that this girl is going to go through at this age, in this time in her life, 2 years ago. Now, the girl's family sought $500,000 for excessive force in the incident and asked the State Department of Education and Hawaii Police Department to establish clear guidelines for executing law enforcement actions involving students. Schatz went on to say this: the long-term mental and socio-emotional impact, that arrests have on children necessitate an analysis of school-based arrests by race, color, national origin, sexual orientation, and gender identity, disability, as well as the impacts of the arrest on the student. So the facts that play into these arrests, race, that seems to always be one of the first things that jumps out when we're dealing with these types of issues of discipline. Color, national origin, then we talk about sexual orientation and gender identity. And finally, disability. Maybe disability is part of the problem and we need to be aware of it, because if a child has a disability, the school should be made aware of that the very first day. If your child has emotional issues, make the school aware of that when you enroll your child in school on the very first day, the very first week. Make sure whomever is in charge of discipline and dealing with discipline from a disability standpoint are aware that my child has some disabilities emotionally, and they may get out of line, but it may be only because of their disability. The senator also wrote this: using that analysis, the department should offer recommendations on when law enforcement referrals may be appropriate and when alternative dispute resolution methods may be appropriate. Alternative dispute resolution methods. Those are the things that need to come into place first. Dispute resolution methods. The senator also continued by saying, school-based arrest should be the last course of action taken only in extreme circumstances. Extreme circumstances. The last thing you want to do is call the police, not the first thing. He finished by saying, as a result, arresting a child also perpetuates the school to prison pipeline, a process, probably a systemic process. And we discussed the difference between systematic and systemic a couple of shows back. A process of criminalizing youth that is facilitated by school disciplinary practices and policies that put students in contact with law enforcement. So when a child comes in contact with law enforcement early on in life, as we say, it could scar them for life. They could be so traumatized that the next time they see a police officer, they are traumatized. They may just, as we say, freak out, just lose it. Or if a police officer is attempting to help them, they may be so traumatized from what happened to them in school that they are so resistant, so adamant about not being helped, don't want to be bothered, touched, assisted in any kind of way by this officer, that they go through emotional changes. These are the things that are happening to children when they are arrested in schools. When they are arrested in elementary schools in particular, in middle school second, and high schools third. It is already a challenge for the educational process of children of color to come to the forefront so that they can learn what they need to learn in order to become better citizens and better interact in our society. But if you have scarred them already by arresting them at 5 years old, who should we lay the fault at the feet of? The parents, the child, the school, the police department? Who should be faulted for this? Because if you don't find some other dispute resolution methods, we're going to have not only a increase in the problem we have, but the school to prison pipeline gets larger and expands, and the numbers will bear out proportionately that more people of color will end up in that pipeline. So you have the system working against educating those of color at a high rate. Now you couple that with disciplining children of color harshly without other dispute methods being used to resolve issues. And it continues a vicious cycle whereby it will not ever be stopped. This is a very important situation in our country, and we must continue to understand that it is going to be a problem if we don't continue to find ways to resolve it. Many blame, and this is an article from the USA Today as of Sunday, many blame the arrest of small children on the proliferation of police in schools. Now, understandable, having police or resource officers in high schools is understandable. Even understandable in middle schools. It should be tempered, in my opinion, that the need to have resource officers in elementary schools should not be at the same level as it is in middle and high schools. There are more than 50,000 full and part-time school resource officers in schools around the country, according to the National Center for Educational Statistics in their research in 2015-2016. That situation happened to a 10-year-old little girl in Hawaii. But here's the 5-year-old that had this happen to her. This happened in Orlando, Florida. Kaya Roll, who at the time was 5, preschooler, got into a situation where she started to have a tantrum. So she was forced from her school and zip tied by 2 Orlando police officers and charged with battery because she was dancing to a beat on the stage, legs kicking in white tights and shiny white shoes. When she said, "When Jesus says yes, nobody can say no," she sung as her aunt recorded the moment. So this happened, and it says that police body cam footage captured her cries, "Don't put handcuffs on me, help me," and stirred outrage around the world. This little girl was having some problems, obviously, at 5 years old. But the only way the people who ran the school felt they could resolve the problem was to put her in ties, zip ties, and remove her and charge her with battery. Educators are now calling on police in elementary schools for typical child behavior, temper tantrums, fighting with other students, stealing spare change and crayons. These are all things that happen. They've been happening for years. Now, granted, they may be a little bit more severe, and because the corporal punishment is no longer in effect, and because there are alternative ways to try to deal with these issues, parents and administrators are trying to deal with the situation. But when it gets to be a little bit more than anyone can handle, where do you turn? No one knows, as the article states, exactly how many young children are arrested each year in school. The data is incomplete. But a USA Today analysis of federal crime reports identified more than 2,600 arrests in schools involving kids between the ages of 5 to 9 between 2000 and 2019. That's an average of 130 children a year being dealt with in these manners. What is a better solution? How do we better handle these types of situations? In another incident where a young boy and a young girl got into a incident, they were in an art class, they were drawing Sonic the Hedgehog, and one child said to the other child, "Your drawing sucks." They got into a shoving match. Teachers called security. The parents of one child said their child was led outside the classroom. When he resisted by sitting down, he was restrained, dragged down the hallway, and handcuffed. No charges were filed. Again, the incident drew attention, and the parents, who have a community organization, are demanding racial justice within the school system where this happened. So, resource officers, school districts are having to come to grips with these situations. And until there is a way to resolve this, it's going to continue to happen. So the child who was handcuffed and dragged down the hallway said, the mother said, not only did the incident traumatize the child, it traumatized the family. Why such harsh things are being done, we don't know. But one thing we do know is that there is a slant to all of this, because there are statistics showing that the slant, like in real life, adult life, where the harsher penalties, the harsher treatment is done to people of color, it happens in the school systems as well. From an article by Danielle Brown, she cites in Florida, Black students represent only 22% of the public school enrollment, but comprise 37% of in-school suspensions. This data comes from a 2019-20 report where 149,000, almost 150,000 in-school suspensions was reported to the Department of Education in the state of Florida. The data also show that white and Hispanic students are not disproportionately disciplined in the area of in-school suspensions. In-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, it's a problem. And it seems to be that it's a problem for children of color. And unless something happens, then we're not going to have any resolve in these situations. So when we talk about the trauma of a child being arrested, that's a mental issue that causes problems later on for the child in life. So as we talk about school arrest of elementary school children, just understand this. We need to be more conscious and cognizant of what's going on. We need to make sure that we can get lawmakers to broaden the scope of the disciplinary actions they are requesting or requiring. In some places, or in 2021, the Cairo Act became a part of a broader law focused on police reforms. The law sets a minimum age of arrest and forbids the arrest of any child under the age of 7 in most circumstances. Now, this may be just in Florida, but it needs to be everywhere. And the U.S. Department of Education is looking for more information because it becomes a safety issue too, not just a security issue, but a safety issue. The Department of Education is looking for more information about safety and school discipline in order to ensure that students are treated equally and school discipline is not discriminatory. Well, for people of color, we understand that discrimination is just a part of life. The Southern Poverty Law Center has said this: students of color attending schools with high suspension rates are more likely to be arrested and incarcerated later in life and less likely to attend a four-year college. More likely to be arrested and incarcerated and less likely to attend college. So there's a double whammy. The education of our children is being very, very much threatened, and the discipline coupled with that low education involvement is causing children of color, especially Black children, to have problems. And then, of course, for those of us who are familiar with the Baker Act, which has become a normalized exclusionary disciplinary tool used against over 37,000 Florida children a year, is also used disproportionately for Black children, whereby 25% of all children who were Baker acted in 2016-17 were Black, despite comprising only 15% of the 18 and under population. So there just seems to be this disproportionate reason that we have our children being arrested, traumatized, taken advantage of simply because of their color. Again, disabilities, you don't know what situations children are dealing with. So a lot of factors come into play. Maybe provide more resources in school to help manage the problem. And maybe there can be more dispute remedy solution in place to remedy the problem. It's not going to end children acting out, acting up in school, but we must find a way to minimize it. This is the Kitchings Table, heard every Tuesday morning on WBISLP 106.9 FM. I am Earl Kitchings, the host of the show. We can also be seen on Facebook Live, YouTube, Roku TV, and GPAC 23. So as we normally do our shows, we get to the midway point and we go to that segment called The Pantry. And in the pantry today, we're going to deal with statistics. And I know statistics aren't everybody's forte, and numbers aren't always what people want to hear. However, it is important that we talk about the numbers in order to understand what's going on in this particular situation of student arrest of elementary school children. And we have found that in the school districts where there is 1 million or more students enrolled, that they seem to have the most number of arrests and or referrals. So when we talk about who's being arrested, data has to be taken in order to compile so you can figure out how you need to address it. So the data stated in 2013-14, nearly 70,000 students were arrested in a small share of American public schools. That's about 8,000 schools. Who gets arrested? 33.7 white, 33.4 black, 24.9 Hispanic. Who gets referred to law enforcement most? 38.2 white, 25.8 black, 22.5 Hispanic. So when we talk about this, and then we talk about what percentage of schools have sworn police officers, many of them are going to be in schools where there are more school children of color. And this will continue. It not only affects the students of color, but it affects the school population, the teachers, and those in the schools. So let's look at the numbers of school incidents as it relates to who's getting arrested or where the more likely problem will be. Because when we look at the public schools, there are 17,000 plus school districts, 96,000 plus schools, and 50 million students. Black or African American students make up 15% of the nationwide population of students. Whites make up 49%, and Hispanic and Latino make up 26%. Boys are 51%, girls 49%. Students with disabilities make up 14% of the national demographic in our schools. So where are most of these incidences coming from? According to this released by the Civil Rights Data Collection on School Climate and Safety, physical attack or fight without a weapon back in 2015-16, 780,000 plus incidents. Threats of physical attack without a weapon, almost 200,000. Robbery without a weapon, 22,600. Threats of physical attack with a weapon, 10,400. Physical attack or fight with a weapon, 11,700. Sexual assault, 9,300. Possession of a firearm, 5,900. Threats of physical attack with a firearm or explosive device, 3,400 incidents. Physical attack with a firearm or explosive device, 2,800. Rape or attempted rape, 400. Robbery with a weapon, 620. Robbery with a firearm or explosive device, 250. These are the serious offenses that are happening in our schools throughout this country. Physical attack or fight without a weapon. Such a large disparity when you look at 787,000 compared to threats of physical attacks without a weapon at 197,000. And again, the rates show that students of color are being referred to law enforcement agencies at a higher rate. It is unfortunate that we have to look at students of color as being such a primary problem of creating these incidents. But I will say this, a lot of the incidents that occur can partially be blamed on the socioeconomic status of the students in these situations. And primarily when there's not enough jobs for the people in these communities, for families to find work, when the jobs are minimum wage jobs, low paying jobs, menial jobs, jobs that some of us would not do, jobs that don't require a lot of education, jobs where people are living in substandard housing. These factors cause portions of the problems. If there were better job opportunities, better pay rates, if the education of some areas were better, then the people who live in these areas and grow up in these areas, it could turn the corner in some cases, not all cases, in some cases. Education is a key. Social economic development, good jobs, good paying jobs, whereby somebody can earn more than just a minimum wage and not be on assisted living. When that can change, it may help turn the tide. There cannot be any teaching in our schools when there is no discipline. And as you can see, discipline can be very systemic and very one-sided, depending on what school it is and depending on the culture or the race of that school as the dominant race in the school. It is unfortunate that children of color have to be traumatized this way. Be fair and equitable, law enforcement agencies. Be fair and equitable, school districts, as to how you treat children and discipline them. Children are going to act up in a young age, but you have to discipline them correctly. And it's a three-pronged approach to making sure that this situation happens and we turn the tide. First and foremost, it all starts at home. If it doesn't get corrected at home, then parents are relying on the schools to do it for them. Schools are relying on parents to do it so that the child comes with a better attitude and less issue. Law enforcement is depending on both parties to do their job in raising that child. Raising children in this day and time is not easy because of the distractions of electronic devices and things they want to see and hear on these devices. We become a culture where everything must be witnessed on an electronic device in order for our children supposedly to seem to get the maximum amount of education. That is not truly the case, in my opinion. But if there's no discipline, we cannot teach in our schools. Our teachers are feeling threatened. They're feeling like they don't want to be a part of this. But we cannot just point out or single out one particular group just because of the color of their skin. This must stop. So that takes care of our pantry portion for today here on the Kitchings Table on Awesome Radio, 106.9 FM, WBISLP, Roku TV, Facebook Live, GPAC 23, and YouTube are also the vehicles that carry our show. And we're always glad to be with you on Tuesday mornings here on 106.9 Awesome Radio. So as we wind down our show for today, which is titled Arresting Elementary School Students in Our Schools, we go on to delve into it. As I was doing research, it seemed like more articles were created on situations that happen in schools in the state of Florida. How ironic that is. But still, if the data is not reported, then you can't do the research to publish it. But between 2005 and 2015, the percentage of primary schools with school resource officers increased by 64%. Nearly 1 in 3 elementary schools had one of these officers there on at least a part-time basis. 1 in 3. SRO, that's what they call them, school resource officers. This trend is to continue as states like Florida and Maryland pass legislation to increase the presence of police in all schools. So again, the legislators are at the crux of this. And when the legislation or when our state reps are more of one party than the other and there's not a balance, then you're going to see things slanted more toward or against one group as opposed to the other. In this article by Chris Curran, he states this: the presence of police in schools has been shown to increase the likelihood that students are arrested for school misconduct. Prior research has found that police agencies that get funding for school police increase arrests of school youth under age 15 by as much as 21%. School agencies, police agencies that get funding for school police increase arrests of school underage students by as much as 21%. This may be because the presence of police can shift the mindsets of schools to one that is more about punishment than it is about teaching students why their behavior is wrong and what they can do to make amends. That part, again, teaching. The teaching of these things in school. School officials have lowered the standard to justify a search than law enforcement. So we continue to keep finding these issues. Instead of asking resource officers to help out with matters of discipline, the authors of the article cites teachers and school administrators should be given training and resources that equip them to respond to student misconduct without relying on school police. A national report cites almost 50% of teachers reported having to put up with misbehavior due to lack of administrative support. Only 6% of teachers thought schools should hire additional police to help with school behavior. Instead, they preferred that resources be put to additional mental health professionals, teaching assistants, and social workers. So, did the school systems remove these people and opt to put in the police officers? You know, the mental health crisis in America has been going on for the last 20, 30 years, and that's because they have minimized mental health hospitals. And when we don't address the mental health issue here in the country, it causes problems. And we see an increase in homelessness. We see an increase of people who have mental issues, who are homeless, who create problems on the streets. Police are called in to intercede with these people who don't really need a police officer, but need more health counseling, mental health counseling, to be particular. And the same goes forth in our schools. We must look at the problems and try to find ways to deal with these issues because, again, children at the age of 5, 6 years old should not be tied, strapped, handcuffed for disciplinary problems that the schools feel they cannot deal with. Parents who don't want to deal with it call the police to deal with child behavior at such a young age. Imagine if someone did you like this and traumatized you, and you were never, ever, ever right again. You never overcame the situation. You were just a little out of sorts one day. You know, everybody gets out of sorts sometimes. Children do too. And, you know, temper tantrums should not be a part of the daily culture of our schools. I get that, and I agree. But the harsh discipline of policing our students in elementary schools is just hard to fathom. Is this the only way a civilized culture can deal with their children? When do we turn the tide and turn the corner for this type of reaction and reaction for making sure this does not continue? It is critical to keep students safe in school. Definitely. It is critical that we do this. Security of our children is one of the forefronts of things that must happen. A secure school, and then a disciplined school. Districts should carefully consider whether police should be in schools and if present, what role they should play in student misconduct, according to the author Chris Curran in his article, Arrest of 6-Year-Old Student Kid Shows the Perils of Putting Police in Primary Schools. Training, yes. Intervention, yes. Finding alternative ways for resolving problems, yes. Police arresting children, no. This is a bad optic. This is a bad way to deal with these problems, and we must find ways to minimize such things. And we must also look at finding ways of making sure that our representatives are not bringing forth laws that will create a problem for specific people from a discriminatory standpoint. Private schools, I have not found any information about their problems, and they probably have them and probably don't cite them. And if they do, they're not cited as often and as much as what's going in the public schools. Public schools are critical simply because these are the schools where it does not cost a parent anything to send that child to school. The discipline is going to be a little bit stronger and stringent in private schools, especially because there is a cost to be paid for that child to attend that school, and they're not going to have many disciplinary problems, because if there's a problem with a child's discipline in a private school, they just remove them and tell them they can't come back. You as the parent must now handle that situation. But they do have problems. But in the public schools, we must understand that if we're not going to change some of the laws for disciplining children, if we're going to not have those children of color always being seen to be the targets of the laws that discriminate against them from both a disciplinary standpoint and an educational standpoint, what type of society are we trying to have here in America? Fair and just, or injustice and unfair? Those are the questions we must continue to ask ourselves. Those are the questions we must continue to fight for, because injustice and unfairness is not a part of what the great experiment in America is supposed to be about. But every day we're dealing with it. So when you see that children are being dealt with it from this standpoint, it breaks your heart. That's going to be our show for today. I'm Earl Kitchings, and we ask you to once again join us every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. here on WBIS Awesome Radio 106.9 FM for another edition of the Kitchings Table. Until then, we're going to ask that you stay safe. Again, if you haven't gotten your vaccination, get it. And make sure you do what you can to help someone else in your life. Until next time, I'm Earl Kitchings saying so long, have a great week, and take care.